Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Salman Anjum at my YouTube channel, and we are defining cell in different ways. Of course, we have defined about cell that how the way the cells are making different bodies and whether the organisms can be called unicellular or multicellular. We also defined at the level of cells that the organisms can be organized as prokaryotes or eukaryotes. And then we started defining about the structure of the cell. We defined its components, like it contains cell wall in the case of plants. Every cell contains cell membrane, the cytoplasm, as well as the cytoskeleton, and of course the organelles. So in fact, there are happening many chemical reactions inside the cell. And one of the very famous chemical reaction which is happening inside the cell is that cells are making their own protein. Of course, we know about proteins, what they do, and we also know about their importance. So have we ever thought that where these proteins be synthesized? Of course, we eat it from different sources, but our cells, they have the capability to make their own protein. I gave you last time the example of the insulin, let's say, and there are many hundreds and thousands of proteins which are made inside the cells. So this is the topic of today, that will study how proteins are synthesized. And to analyze properly how cells they make protein, we need to define what are those components inside the cell who are involved in this function, which is protein synthesis. And those four components inside the cells, they are four different organelles, namely nucleus, ribosome, endoplasmic reticulum, and Golgi complex. These are those important organelles which are present inside the cell, and they are involved to start and complete the function of protein synthesis. And of course, I would first explain all of these individual organelles, and alongside I would keep explaining what individually they are contributing for the synthesis of protein. So first of all, let's look at nucleus. So we go to the whiteboard. So let's draw the cell. Let's say this is one cell. I have drawn the cell membrane, which is the cell boundary. If you wish, you can draw an extra layer if you are trying to draw the plant cell, but it does not matter, at least when we are talking about nucleus or something like protein synthesis, because we are interested what is happening inside the cell. That's why I'm starting from cell membrane just to draw a cell. So now I want to draw the nucleus. So let's say this is nucleus inside the cell. And you remember what is inside the nucleus? Inside the nucleus there is DNA, and you can draw the DNA like this. So it is DNA. So first of all, what is nucleus doing? Nucleus is storing the DNA inside. Nucleus is protecting the DNA inside. Secondly, from this diagram, you can clearly see that nucleus, which is inside the cell, it is also made by some sort of a boundary, and this boundary is also a membrane. This is the membrane of the cell, which is called cell membrane, and this is the membrane of the nucleus, and this is called nuclear membrane. The purpose of nuclear membrane or cell membrane is roughly the same, to basically regulate the in and out process which is happening here. Certain chemicals, certain things, they want to come inside the nucleus, certain things they want to go outside the nucleus. So of course, this nuclear membrane has the capability to regulate this process. Okay, since the topic is what nucleus is doing in the process of protein synthesis, so basically the answer lies in the DNA, which is present inside the nucleus. This DNA contains a lot of genes. Now we have to just quickly define what genes are. If for you, for the sake of simplicity, I draw a line here to represent the same DNA. Let's say, for the sake of simplicity only, I am drawing a line, a straight line, and I'm calling this one as the same DNA. So let's suppose this is DNA. So DNA is very long. It is starting from this point and ending at this point. But this DNA contains genes. Genes mean you can call this area a gene from here to there, and then again maybe this area from here to there can be the second gene, and this area from here to there can be third gene. So this is gene number 1, this is gene number 2, and this is gene number 3. So if I ask you this question, what is a difference between gene and DNA? Is gene not a DNA? Or DNA not a gene? No. Technically, they both are the same, of course. As you can see there, this is a straight line, and all together this is DNA. So whatever is present there, whether I'm saying that one is a gene or not, it is DNA basically. So genes are in fact DNA, right? But we are naming some part of the DNA as gene, and we don't say other part of the DNA as gene. So why this is a difference? So we can define it this way, that gene is basically that area of DNA which can contribute in protein or RNA synthesis. For example, if this part allows to be copied as RNA, so this part is called a gene, and ultimately this RNA would lead to protein synthesis. That means ultimately this protein is made by this gene, or you can say the instructions, they are coming from this part of DNA to make this protein, and this area of DNA does not make any protein. So we would call this part as DNA, of course, but we would not call this part as a gene. Then again, this area of the same DNA contributes again to make RNA, and then again to make another kind of protein. So this area is again contributing in the synthesis of RNA and protein. So we would name this part of DNA as gene, and this is gene number 2. And same is true for this part. This part is also allowing to be copied as RNA, and then it would also contribute in the making of its own type of protein. So that means this long DNA has certain areas that allow making of the RNA or protein, and we call that areas as gene. For example, this part, gene number 1, gene number 2, gene number 3. And the same DNA has certain areas which do not contribute to protein synthesis, and we would not name them as genes. So if we move on now, so let's go back to these slides actually. So what slides are talking about? Let's say the first one is nucleus, and now we know a lot about nucleus. It is basically a membrane bound organelle. you have seen that it has its own membrane, and we named that one as a nuclear membrane. And it stores the DNA. As you have seen, the nucleus contains DNA. And nuclear membrane is basically double layered. It's not a single layered membrane, it's a double layered membrane. It is bound by two membranes, not single membrane. It has inner membrane as well as outer membrane. So you can draw it this way. You can draw another layer here like this. So that means there is more protection of the DNA because it has two layers or two membranes are there. And nucleus is only present in eukaryotes. And we have defined this thing before while we were talking about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, that the plants and the animals who are eukaryotes, they have the nucleus, as well as the protists, they also have nucleus, while the bacteria and other prokaryotes, they don't have the nucleus, but of course they have the DNA inside. And of course protein synthesis happens in prokaryotes for sure, although there is no nucleus, but of course there is DNA, and of course there are genes present, so they contribute in the making of protein. So what DNA does? DNA contains information about protein synthesis. As I've explained that certain areas of the DNA, they contribute in the protein synthesis. Or you can say it this way, that those areas, they have the recipe, that the cell can use that recipe to make the protein, while other areas of the DNA, they cannot be read by the cell, and then protein cannot be formed by using those areas. But technically it is all DNA, whether gene part of the DNA, it is DNA, and non-genic part of the DNA, it is DNA. Technically it is all DNA. And then once proteins are formed, what they are doing, as we have defined about proteins before, proteins, they carry out different cellular functions. And one famous example was insulin. And you can study a lot about insulin's function. What insulin does? Insulin is a hormone, it is a protein, and its job is to regulate the amount of glucose in our blood.